Good evening, Dr. Robinson. Again, I am Tania Williams, and tonight I'd like to discuss my research topic, which is mental health in collegiate sports athletics, how we can approach it through the lens of social work education, all while using Shaya's framework on socially engineered trauma. With this particular population, I think it's important, according to the framework, for us to see the mental health struggles as not just a problem with weakness or personal stress, but also in that larger, broader way about how the system is harming the mental health outcomes of student athletes. And then I'll talk a little bit about what I think as social workers we can do differently. Of course, with this population, I do believe that student athletes often face constant performance pressure. They have to deal with racial and gender based stereotyping. And then the expectation is always for them to push through, even when they may not be feeling their best mentally or physically. And then mental health care is not always dealt with in a holistic way, and they may not have access to them. So, again, it's not just an individual struggle, but there are signs of systemic trauma that's embedded in the sports culture, especially collegiate sports. So, what I think Shaya does is to help us to reframe those struggles. So, again, it's not seen just as personal shortcomings, but truly as the products of the socially engineered trauma that can harm athletes emotionally and mentally. So, how do we respond to this trauma in a meaningful way? I'm glad you asked. And I think that with Shaya's proposal of the shift from traditional education to socioeducation, that gives us a great starting point. So it's not just about teaching athletes the facts, but it's really about encouraging them to think about their systems that they're a part of in a critical way, helping them to connect some of their personal struggles to those larger societal forces that may be affecting their mental health. You having to create space for their healing journey as well as their learning. So instead of telling athletes to toughen up, to press through when they're feeling pressure, we're actually helping to give voice and helping them explore where the stigma might come from, maybe if they're experiencing racism, sexism, or any inequality financially. It means touching coaches, athletic staff, anybody that will interact with athletes to help them understand that it's not just about performance, it's about their identity, it's about their environment, and how we can best support them in that. And so I think Shaya also talks about the concept of healing justice. And for me, what that looks like with athletes is supporting care, rest, a place where they can be emotionally vulnerable, and helping them to navigate some of those systems. So, what can that look like in real time? I think that looks like mental health services that are culturally responsive, of course, trauma informed, cultures in athletic departments where therapy might be normalized, rest is normalized, and people are not seen as weak, environments where peers can discuss mental health openly. And instead of asking athletes to really hold it together and to push through, we really allow them to be human in that system where we can hear their stories, we can hear them say that they're exhausted, and then help them to begin their healing journey. Social workers who are working in collegiate settings really can be powerful allies in this type of work. And so instead of being reactive in our approaches, we really can help athletes to give voice and name those systemic pressures that they're facing. Again, training the coaches, training the staff, helping them understand trauma, equity, inclusion, identity, and then really being an advocate not just for the athlete but for institutional change so that athletes do feel supported and they're not silenced. In regards to educators in social work programs, I think there's a role there as well, because if you're incorporating Shia's framework and socioeducation into those learning environments, we're preparing students to be advocates, to be therapists, administrators, so that we're responding to athletic mental health in a more holistic way for sure. Now, I'd like to talk about a case example. This is Jordan. He is a 20-year-old junior at an HBCU in the South. He is a scholarship athlete on the baseball team, majoring in business, and he is one of a few players from a rural, low-income background. He is the first in his family to attend college. So Jordan does come in to meet with the mental health therapist, the social worker in the athletic department, and he's reporting some increased anxiety, difficulty sleeping, not feeling very motivated, increased irritability, and certainly his academic performance has declined. The coach has noticed that he's been a little mentally checked out during practice. And so what Jordan discloses during that counseling session is that he often feels like he has to carry the weight of his team, the weight of his community. He also shares that when he's struggling, he doesn't like to talk about it, especially being a young black man. He thinks that he's going to be seen as soft, even ungrateful or weak because of the opportunity he has to play sports. And so I'd really like to look at those systemic factors that could be affecting Jordan's mental health. I'll discuss 6. So the first is racialized expectations and performance pressure. I think that as a black male athlete at this HBCU, Jordan is really navigating some cultural and societal expectations where he's made to feel that he has to succeed at all cost or against all the odds. He's feeling that pressure to represent himself, but his family, his hometown, his culture, and this is leading to some hypervigilance, performance anxiety, and also some burnout for Jordan. Number 2, there's some internalized masculinity norms and stigma around mental health. Certainly, black masculinity often discourages emotional vulnerability. And so I think Jordan's fears of being perceived as weak or distraction, or if he discloses this distress, really only reinforces silence, reinforces that emotional isolation. 3, generational and socioeconomic pressures. Because Jordan comes from a low-income, first-generation background, he really is carrying a burden of making it out, and there's this unspoken fear of letting others down, especially his family. And so here, I think we uniquely see some of the intersections as it relates to trauma, poverty, scarcity, and then the hope for upward mobility through athletics that's really resting on his shoulders. 4, institutional resource disparities. HBCUs often operate with fewer resources than the predominantly white institutions or PWIs, especially as it relates to counseling, sports psychology, or even academic support. So here, Jordan's mental health needs may go unmet. Maybe there are some staffing shortages, stigma, or there's not a lot of targeted outreach to the athletes in that department. 5, historic and systemic racism. I think that in the historical context, there's been racism in sports and education. And so his experience can reflect how these systems have been really designed to maximize performance, but then provide minimal emotional support. So again, I think that's a great example of the socially engineered trauma. And finally, the disconnect between cultural identity and institutional structure. I think that for the most part, we can all agree that HBCUs are typically affirming spaces. However, I think athletic departments still operate under some traditional models where it's not really supportive of healing practices, vulnerability. It's always next man up, or perform, or it's next man up. So we really have to be trained in anti-oppressive and really trauma-informed approaches. So here, I think it's just important for us to realize that Jordan's distress is not personal, it is broader, and that the symptoms he's experiencing are really logical responses to some of the trauma that has to do with race, class, his masculinity, and some of the institutional structures at play. And so, again, we do want Jordan to be resilient, but we also want to create systemic change so that he can understand it in a broader way. So, as social workers, what can we do? I think it's very, very important to validate Jordan's experience. Talk about the racial expectations, talk about the socioeconomic burdens, and some of the inequalities that could exist at the school, and making sure that we use language that really connects what he's going through personally to the broader injustice will help him to feel not so alone and maybe not broken in the sense that something is just wrong with him. I think, again, that we can apply the trauma informed and the healing centered engagement. Typically, there are some responses, and we've been taught those: the fight, the flight, and the freeze. Especially in those athletes who are encouraged to push through. But I think that if we are encouraging trust, empowering Jordan in that environment, and then creating some safety during those sessions, that this is how he gets to a place where he feels comfortable to rest, to express himself emotionally, to really connect, because he is being affirmed. So again, you want to use those interventions, but again, you want to help him to understand how that exists in a broader spectrum. So, taking into consideration his race, the gender, the class, the athletic identity, and the intersection of all of those things, it's just really important for us to create a space where, as a Black male, he can be affirmed and he can explore whatever he's feeling without shame or without feeling he has to fit into a certain stereotype. We can also use the socioeducation that Shia discusses to help Jordan see that what he's going through is very, very valid, and really help him, again, to be able to reflect on some of those things in a very safe space. Also, I think I mentioned this earlier, advocating at the institutional level. You want to work with the athletic department and maybe even a counseling center to encourage routine mental health screening for athletes, just like we promote physical health screenings. It has to be equally important. We want to make sure that the response and staff is culturally responsive and trauma informed. And so you do want to do the psychoeducation sessions, but also making sure that they can understand it in a socio-educational way. Because Jordan's care really shouldn't be just up to him. It really should be supported by those changes on all levels, especially the systems level change. And finally, we do want to encourage Jordan to have some healthy expression and connection. So whether that's increasing peer support, maybe helping other athletes to feel like the culture, mental health culture, is so normalized that they don't mind seeking help and they don't see it as a weakness, but they really see opening up and being vulnerable as a strength. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Good night.